That is Jake Hatch of Locked On Cougars, Drake Toll of Locked On Big 12. If you hit subscribe, we get to keep our jobs, by the way. The best rivalry in the Big 12, bar none, it is BYU and Utah, the holy war. But now Utah fans or analysts are claiming that BYU is tampering in recruiting with Utes players to get them to Provo, as they've landed a couple from the portal. And BYU fans are saying that Utah fans are nasty, cheating liars. I mean, this has gone back and forth. And Jake, this was a big rivalry 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 5 years ago. But today, it feels as hot as I've seen it, as these two teams are now in conferences in close confines. And has this gone way too far?
I don't think it's gone too far. Here's the deal, Drake. This rivalry goes back well over 100 years. Have I told you the story about how the first intercollegiate matchup between BYU and Utah ended?
Jake, here's the deal. I've learned 90% of people who watch Locked On Big 12 on YouTube aren't everydayers. So 10% of these people probably know the story. 90% will hear it for the first time.
So this is back in the late 1800s. BYU and Utah, their first intercollegiate matchup was a baseball game. How did it end? A benches clearing brawl.
Yeah.
Yes, that is this rivalry in a nutshell. From the very get-go, it has been at each other's throats, literally and figuratively. And that's the thing about this. These two fan bases love to poke at each other, and it's like two siblings who just simply can't get along. Hey, he's looking out my window. Well, you're looking out my window. Hey, you're poking me. Hey, I work in sports radio here in Salt Lake City, Drake, and I don't mind saying that the rivalry, it programs 60-70% of our shows throughout the year. And I'm not talking just college football season. It goes, as I mentioned earlier, 24/7, 365. It is a year-round rivalry, and it permeates literally every facet of life. You can have your next door neighbor as a Utah fan where you may be a BYU fan, and all you guys do is essentially burn a wire of you into each other's grass all year long and just get after one another. You put up a flag on the side of their house. It is in everything along this along rivalry lines here in Utah, and it is absolutely unique.
Is there another? I want to continue talking about the rivalry itself, but from the Big 12 perspective, is there another rivalry in this conference that even comes close?
I would say the Territorial Cup to a level, because the Arizona schools are so linked together just with what they've done for so long down there. The other one that I would kind of consider to be close to it, it's not as well known, but it's one that you're very familiar with. I like to call it the Rivalry. TCU and Baylor, they like to get after each other. Now, it may not be on the same level as BYU and Utah, but that's a good one. And the other one I will mention is Farmageddon. Iowa State, Kansas State, they love to get after one another, but all three of those, they just don't match up to the overall vitriol. And it's legit vitriol that exists between Cougar and Ute fans.
I do love a good Farmageddon. I went for the first time this last year, and it's just cool. Those two schools hate each other. They both have in-state rivals, but they really, really hate each other. And I wish that Brett Yormark would make that an annual game. Going back to this year's version of BYU and Utah in the Holy War, fans throwing trash on the field. And look, to play it both ways, BYU player.
We had a felony come out of that this year, by the way. Did you see that story?
Right, that's right. Who hit the cheerleading coach, right, with a water bottle?
Yeah, clear on in the face, knocked her out, and now is facing a felony charge. So that's always fun.
So it brought out the worst of the rivalry, which brings up the question, has it gone too far? And then the athletic director from Utah comes to the podium and says, we were happy to be here, now we're not. Kyle Whittingham throws a chair, but BYU players are stomping in the Utah end zone post-game, right? Celebrating, not with their teammates, but, by taunting Utah fans. So phone works both ways. Both sides were certainly, I don't want to say completely equally at fault, I'll put it that way, but at fault nonetheless. Jake, does a matchup like that show that this rivalry is as heated as it's been in a very long time?
Absolutely. They're in the same conference once again. And then, by the way, the stakes are even higher than they ever have been before, because both of these programs now have that door open to making the college football playoff and thereby having a chance to win a national title. BYU fans love to point at the fact that they have a national championship trophy in Provo, Utah, and Utah fans, it burns them. It absolutely chaps their hides to have that shoved in their face. To have that door open for both of these programs, if one can get over on the other at any level, even if it's not a championship level, if they can get one past their rival, they will take every opportunity to do that. That's players, that's coaches, that's administrators, and the lay fans themselves.
Jake, for the first time, this rivalry is being played and I know college football has shifted, right? Used to conferences were a bit more spread out and they fluctuated. In today's college football, there is a very clear Power Four. Now BYU and Utah are not only in the same conference, but in the same power conference. It's called the Power Four for a reason. How has that, adding these two schools to the Big 12, created a new dynamic in a very old rivalry?
It's essentially you just made the stakes in terms of how people perceive things even more like one-sided, depending on which side you're on, if that makes sense. They want nothing more than to watch, if you're a Utah fan, to watch the Cougars fall flat on their face. Trust me, I am seeing Utah fans with BYU struggles in basketball right now, Drake, saying, hey, guess what, BYU? We could suck like you do, but we do it for a lot less money, because they're obviously thinking of the AJ DeBonsa deal and the multiple millions of dollars BYU is thought to have been paying him to sign with the Cougars. Here's the deal. These two, they love nothing more than sticking it to one another. No matter how seemingly small that slight may be, they will make a mountain out of a molehill and give them just 5 minutes and they can do it.
Jake, I like Utah owns the record. I mean, Utah owns the record by a pretty solid margin. I know these schools based decade to decade have gone back and forth, but how do BYU fans respond when a Utah fan says, hey, we own the all-time series by a lot?
Well, they'll point to, the first 20 years, Ike Armstrong. Okay, here's the deal. BYU has had long stretches where they dominated the rivalry, but Utah has the longer stretches because BYU didn't win a game in this rivalry since BYU claims it started in 1922. Now, we have matchups in the 1890s that BYU doesn't claim that BYU actually won. So I don't know why they don't claim those, Drake, because actually help out, even up that record just a little bit. But the bigger thing is, for the first 20 plus years of this rivalry, BYU, the best they could do was tie that game. They could not win it. When they finally broke through, they tore down the goalposts, cut them up into little pieces, and to this day, they are all over in Cougar Nation. I have seen multiple pieces of those goalposts from the 1940s that are still floating around. It is a rivalry that it burns deep for everybody involved in it, and I, for one, I love it. I know there's a lot of fans out there on both sides who say, yeah, it's probably gone too far, and they don't like the vitriol with it. I can tell you that with it having Power Four stakes now, it has raised it to another level, and it's only getting better in my mind.
I'm going to phrase this question in an odd way and then kind of come back around. How does this rivalry help TCU, Cincinnati, UCF, Houston? How does it help Colorado? How does it help Baylor? How does this rivalry help the Big 12?
I think the biggest thing is it can bring eyeballs from afar because, as we all know, BYU's got an international fan base with its affiliation with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm telling you, Drake, you posted a thing of where the eyeballs for your podcast not too long ago, and a lot of them came from Utah. If I were to do a similar one, Drake, I could tell you I will have international spots show up on those charts because people listen and tune in from all over the world. And they also... Cougar fans like to hate watch / hate read everything about Utah at the same time. So the extra eyeballs that are drawn because of this rivalry to the conference as a whole, it's going to help everybody because they will pay a little more attention to a Cincinnati. They're going to pay attention to UCF. They're going to pay attention to West Virginia because those are future opponents that BYU and Utah have to play. So it's going to bring extra eyeballs, and just the fact that these fans are so curious about their new conference home, they're going to do extra research, and that's going to bring extra attention to the conference as a whole.
Jake, where can folks find more of your work?
If you want to follow all things BYU, check out Locked On Cougars wherever you get your podcast. It's also on YouTube. I'm having a great time talking BYU every single day. And if you want my thoughts on all things sports, my Twitter handle, if you're watching this on YouTube, is right down there. It's Jacob C. Hatch, or the show. You can find it as well. Locked On Cougars on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram as well.
That is Jake Hatch of Locked On Cougars. This has been, and it always will be. Make sure to follow along the rest of the week as we'll be covering all things football and basketball across this conference, and specifically with the Cougars. Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Dose Grande.